Welcome to the Permanent Podcast, real talk about owning, operating, buying, and selling small businesses. The reality is that businesses are made up of people, and people are messy. So, how do you navigate such a messy and complicated landscape? Well, let's talk about it on the Permanent Podcast. How many companies do you work with where they have no process whatsoever? It's just kind of very organic.
It's like, who's available? How much time do we have? What's the role? And they just whip it up from scratch every time.
Right.
So there's nothing repeatable about it. There's nothing consistent about it. And that's what we're trying to get better at. We can only predict, or we can improve predicting good hires the more we have control and the more that we have a good process in place.
So you're going to help me go from wherever I'm at to however you think about it.
Right.
How many steps would you give me?
This is probably 6 steps.
Okay.
A soft 6, maybe 7.
Okay. So you're going to give me 6 to 8. I'm going to add one more bonus.
Yes, there we go. Exactly. I'm going to share our hiring playbook here at Permanent Equity for how we hire professional level roles within the portfolio companies.
Can you just clarify what professional level means?
Professional level being roles like accountant, even graphic designer, director of marketing, anything that is kind of a one-off role. You're not hiring 10 of these people to do the same job. So it's sort of that first layer of management potentially, or individual contributor at a professional level.
Great. And so we're going to go through your process. We even have one of our coworkers and my friend Johnny coming in to do a kind of a fake job interview.
He's my friend too, so yeah.
He's my friend, your coworker.
Oh, okay. All right. Noted.
He might like you way more than me. Probably does like you way more than me. So he's going to come in and we'll do that and get to listen in on kind of how you're thinking about the job interview from your perspective.
Yeah, and Johnny has a cool perspective because he's come up through a top tier MBA program, and they really focus on that in the MBA program is interviewing well, right? So he has a unique perspective from that background. So I'm sure he'll have some insight to share from the interviewee side as well.
Okay, so let's dive in. What would be the first thing that you're thinking through?
So the first thing I think people need to think about when they're just trying to improve their process, right? It is a process, and don't get caught up on being perfect necessarily the first time around, but it's an evolution. This playbook that I'm going to share with you today is something that has evolved over my time here at Permanent Equity for sure. And it's based on learnings from other people that are way smarter than me. So there's a book called Who, the A Method in Hiring, Top Grading. All of that to say is take this and apply it to what works for you within your organization. That's totally unique. But the first thing I would start with is a good job description. And that really comes down to understanding the role from all angles. So what are the competencies required for this role? What does this role look like if it's successful? Why is it important to the company? Why are we even hiring this role? How will it impact the revenue? Really thinking through that position so that when you are talking to a candidate, not only do you know exactly what you're looking for from them, but you also have a better idea of exactly what it is you're going to be providing them in this opportunity as well. So think through that job description, make sure everyone involved in the hiring process is keyed in on those essential elements before you even start talking to candidates about it.
A question on that. So you mentioned something you might be hiring for would be a accountant, graphic designer. How do you calculate the impact that'll have on the revenue?
It's not necessarily going to be like, oh, this graphic designer is going to add $2 million in top line revenue for us, but you can tie it back to core strategies for the company. So for instance, if I'm hiring a graphic designer and one of our key strategies for growth is product development, that is essentially tied to the graphic designer. You're designing product packages, you're designing our e-commerce collateral. Your role is essential in product development and product advertising to sell our products to generate revenue. So it doesn't have to be quantifiable in a dollar sense necessarily, but they know why their role is important to how the company earns money.
Okay, so getting clarity and buy-in on the job description and what you're trying to solve for from the whole team is step one.
Yep.
What's next?
Step 2 is you've posted your job description. It's live on job boards. Applicants are coming in. You need to create a resume screening process that is both automated and effective. If you have 400 inbound applications for a role, no small business hiring manager has time to sort through 400 resumes and read through 400 resumes. They're busy. They got a lot of stuff going on. So we need to streamline and we need to automate. So how do you do that? The first way that I like to do it is I create an automated set of screening questions. So if you have an applicant tracking software, you can do this within that. But if you don't, you can create this with a combination of a Google spreadsheet, a Zapier connection, and a Gmail account. So the key here that we want to focus on is how do we automate or how do we make more efficient the process of bouncing people out of our funnel, right? So what I'll do is I'll get with the hiring manager of the role and we'll identify 3 to 6 key questions that we feel like are good identifiers that either will indicate a fit or not a fit. And we'll send those out in a screening question so that as soon as the candidate applies, they get sent an email with your screening questions. So these screening questions are things like specific skills you need to see them have to move forward in the process. And that's essentially what you're thinking about. So for example, at one time we were hiring an accountant for a construction company that we owned. Construction accounting is super different than traditional accounting. So 2 of the things that we needed to know, did they have experience with percentage of completion accounting? That's a very specific thing. Did they have experience with a whip?
Like Indiana Jones.
Like Indiana Jones, exactly. So those were 2 of our screening questions. If they answered no to either of those, they were immediately bounced from our process and sent a no thank you email. So step 3 is going to be your screening interview.
Okay.
So this one is the most important one to get right, I think, just because it saves so much wasted time later in the process. And if you can have someone who has developed and a very good interview screener kind of at the midpoint of your interview funnel, it is such an underrated part of the interview process, I think. This screening interview is essentially 30 to 60 minutes, depending on the level of the job. I do it anywhere to 30 to 60 minutes. I always hold it on Zoom or a video call because I value the non-verbal interaction as part of that conversation. And the other thing I always do during these screening interviews is I have an AI note-taking app that runs in the background. So I don't want to be focused on taking notes. I want to be focused on being present in the conversation. I only have 30 to 60 minutes to try to make a really concise judgment call. This is also the point in the process where you're going to mention reference checks, right? So you might have heard it called TORC before. It's the threat of a reference check. You just want to mention that as part of your process, you have reference checks. At this point in the process, we want people to know that a reference check is part of the process, and it just helps them to be fully honest with their experiences. So the first thing you're going to do in the screening interview is you want to set the stage. I think it's really important to set a stage of emotional intelligence in your interviewing process. I am not a fan of interviewers that like to have more of an interrogation in their interview. I view my role as an interviewer as trying to create the best opportunity for the candidate to share with me all of the strengths and all of their skills. And if I'm creating a process or an environment that seems intimidating, that's not allowing them to be their best self. I want to get to know them. I want to get to know what's important to them in their next role. And then that way I can then tell them about the role. And we can, right at the start of our conversation, have a fit conversation. You know, they've told me what's important to them, and then I've just told them about the role. And then we can say, does this seem like a good fit? And sometimes the answer is no. And the conversation stops right there. You don't need to spend 60 minutes if you can identify in the first 15 that the fit's not there. It's a kindness to them as well, because you're showing that you're concerned about what is important to them in their next role, and saves everybody a lot of time. I will say Brent is super good at this. He is able to match people's energy, I would say. It's his superpower, one of them for sure. What Brent's tactic is, he sees wherever the person is, And he matches that. And sometimes he'll even go just under that. So what I mean by that is I've seen him in settings where the person we were talking to was coming on strong ego. And so when somebody comes in strong ego, Brent's tactic is to go in like super humble. And it totally levels the conversation, because then that person is feeding off of that energy, and they're probably thinking,
they feel less pressure to posture.
Subconsciously, they don't have to posture anymore, because it's like, okay, the whole level was just like brought down a notch.
Right.
Like, let's just chill here.
That's cool.
So that's something that I try to do, is just set the tone of that interview where it's not me coming in as an authority figure and I'm drilling and interrogating you. It's me coming in as being genuinely curious about, what are you looking for?
Right.
And we're just trying to see if this is a good fit.
Right.
So some details about, once you've established that sort of tone, you've figured out it's a good fit, then you're just asking 2 or 3 questions that you feel like are important to screen for. So it should always include a high-level career walkthrough. You want to know where they've been in their career and why they've transitioned. So at a high level, what have you been up to? Talk me through the transitions between each of your career steps. And then a little more time spent focused on the most recent 1 or 2 roles, and, 1 or 2 questions that you feel like are essential for your culture, or maybe some of the soft skills involved in that job. 30 to 60 minutes, you should be able to get a good sense of, is this person the right fit for our company? And if the answer is yes, they move through to the next round.
Okay, so step 1 was alignment on the job description internally, posting that. And then step 2 is the automation you can set up to deal with all the applicants in an effective way.
Yep, screening those resumes.
Right. Step 3 is this screening interview that we just talked about.
Yep.
What's next?
Next step is what we would call a competency interview. So if we're hiring an accountant, full disclosure, I am not an accountant.
Right.
If I'm doing the screening interview, I'm not the person that's going to necessarily be drilling into hard skills for the role, right? So competency interview, this should be done by someone who will be the direct supervisor for this role, somebody who has done this role in the past, who has those core competencies. And we don't need to spend a lot of time talking about this one, just because it is so different job to job, based on what the exact role is. Your competency interview is going to look totally different. But the key thing here is you just need to have identified the key competencies, hard skills and soft skills, that will make someone successful in this role. And then you spend about an hour digging into those things. This is also a good time to let the interviewee ask questions, especially if they're specific to the role. A lot of times you might not know the answers in the screening interview, but in this second round interview, that supervisor is likely to have good answers for that. It's important in a professional role that you have that, so that you can really identify that they have the hard skills needed and the soft skills as well. Moving on to the 5th step. This one is optional, but we almost always include it in our process here at Permanent Equity. And that would be either a deliverable component of work product, or potentially a personality assessment. Now, I know you told me I couldn't talk about
No, I actually love personality
Myers-Briggs.
assessments. I just was being
All right.
sarcastic.
So in the past, the way that this has looked for us is a paid deliverable portion of the hiring process. And, not everybody has the resources to do a paid assignment. So if you're not going to do a paid assignment, just make sure it's not too cumbersome, right? We're not asking people to spend 5 hours on something for free. So if you're going to do an unpaid deliverable, don't make it more than 30 minutes, I would say.
See, I did a podcast edit for free. Took me like 3 hours.
Wow.
But I wanted to kill it.
I'm sure you did kill it.
I got the job.
So for example, when we hired Sarah G. Dubb, who is our managing editor, there were 5 finalist candidates that had made it through the competency interview. And so those are 5 favorite candidates. We asked them each to spend 2 to 4 hours preparing one of 3 assignments. They got to choose which one they wanted to do. We paid them each. And so they all had 1 week to provide us that deliverable. And then based on that, we selected 2 of those to move forward into our final kind of in-person interview. that deliverable component can be really, really essential for jobs that have a clear product that's accessible. For the instance of a graphic designer, this would be super relevant. Marketing roles, very relevant. For someone who you're hiring as an accountant or a controller, that's a little harder to do a deliverable component. But if you can't really identify a project or kind of a deliverable component, one thing that we've done in the last controller we hired, we gave our top candidates an assessment. So pick your favorite one. I believe for this hire, we used the DISC.
Come on in, Johnny. Johnny.
He's being polite. Also, it's raining outside.
Hey, dude. We're in the middle of...
Our special guest.
Yeah, Johnny, our special guest, has arrived. We're in the middle of her walking through how she thinks about her process, and then we're going to be ready for the interview. So I hope he gets the fake job.
Me too.
I love DISC. Have you done the DISC test, Johnny?
Many moons ago.
What letter are you?
I don't even remember.
Oh, I'm a D.
We're about to redo it. The ops team, we're all going to do.
Can I just take it just to have fun and be a part of it?
Are you part of the ops team?
I am not in any way.
I guess that's a no.
What are you?
I'm a strong D.
Okay.
Does that surprise you?
No. Well, a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I'm a DC.
Okay. See, I'm a DI. For those who don't know, they might have just turned off the podcast. For those who do know, we're all really excited because if you like the DISC test, you love the DISC test.
Right. I mean, I just like assessments. I don't know. It's just fun to nerd out on.
Agreed.
But anyway, the point in that process where you would kind of give your finalists the DISC assessment or whatever assessment of your choosing.
Well, just give me that. So we just said DISC. What others would you recommend if people aren't doing any of that?
Yeah, so you could do a Myers-Briggs test. There's one that's called the Colby. Really, all you're looking for is additional information to help you feel like you understand this person as best as you possibly can during an interview process, right? Like our main goal is to say, what's going on here with this person? And are they the right fit for our company? And so we're just using a lot of different ways to try to get to the answer. And personality assessment is one of the ways that can maybe give you some insight. The way we use it is to inform the questions and the things that we want to kind of poke at and dig in on in our final round interview.
But you also don't want to hire a D into a position where they need to be strong C.
Right. Or if that's what the DISC assessment shows and we think that we need a high D in this role, it's worth having that conversation of saying like, okay, this is a trait that we feel like is essential to be successful in this role.
Right.
You know, how do you bring that trait? And I don't think we should be screening people out based on assessments.
Okay, that's good.
Personally, but I do think it allows us conversation, speaking points and interview deep dives, if you will.
That's a good nuance there. Don't screen out, but use it as a tool.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was 5. Are we on 6 yet? Or is there more to 5?
Yes, we made it to 6.
Did we make it to 6? We
got there. Yes, we're so close.
Man, Johnny, I can't wait for your interview. It's going to be so sick.
Let's do it.
No, it's not time yet.
Not time. Wait, hold your horses. I'm writing down, Johnny seems impatient.
Okay. I'm getting some tips from that.
Just kidding.
Constant observation.
Just kidding.
Everything's under scrutiny.
So yeah, 6. This is the in-person component of the interview process. If you're doing a fully remote hiring process, this could be Zoom, but it's going to be kind of a long Zoom. So we typically do 2 to 4 hours. And the best way to set this up is to have multiple people involved in the process. I think it's better to have multiple people involved simultaneously.
Yeah.
So for instance, if we have 5 people and everyone's going to spend 45 minutes with Johnny, it's a high likelihood that the first 15 minutes of each one of those conversations is going to look almost identical.
Right. Don't make Johnny repeat it every time.
Right. That's a waste. I think the best way to set this up is you start with a meal or you start with kind of a communal event.
The Bud's Barbecue.
Yeah. It's the Bud's Barbecue part of the process.
For those who don't know, Bud's Barbecue is a recent addition to Columbia, Missouri. And I'm going to come out and say it. I'm going to say it right here publicly. It is hands down the best barbecue in Missouri. And I would put it up against, and Johnny, feel free to challenge me because you did write a barbecue book, but I would put it up against any barbecue I've had in my life.
It's legit.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if I go quite that far, but it's legit. It's top notch.
I will say I've never eaten barbecue in Texas. So I'm limited in my...
Wow. Here's my beef.
Nice.
With Bud's.
Well said.
They don't have turkey.
Ain't nobody got time for turkey.
I'm a smoked turkey person.
All right.
Okay.
You need to go to Six Flags. Get your turkey there.
I don't want a turkey leg. This is not a Renaissance fair. I want smoked turkey breasts. I don't like the fatty meats.
He's got chicken.
The chicken's a lot of work. There's bone involved. There's like little like ligaments and stuff happening.
I don't think this is going to work for you. Jason at Bud's is our buddy, so we're giving him a little love here. I'll see if he can throw a few dollars for this one here, a little sponsorship.
Just tell him to get some turkey. That's all I'm saying.
In exchange for this podcast, Kelie would like a turkey meal.
Yes,
he would do it. He'd be down.
So you start the interview with that casual environment where everybody that's going to be part of the interview process gets to get that initial introduction. So what we're trying to do here is eliminate that repetitive first 15 minutes of every kind of interaction. From there, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. If you're following the top grading method, they say they want 2 people for 4 hours, and you're going to do a deep dive on every job they've had, kind of go job by job and really dig in for 4 hours on that. That's one way to do it. That can be successful. We've also done this, where several people get 45 minutes to an hour, maybe in groups of 2, kind of tag teamed version. But the essential part of this in-person interview is that you want to get really deep on their experience, what they've taken from every job that they've had. What did you learn? What have you brought from that learning to your next roles? We talk a lot in this phase of the hiring process about how they can find and hire and develop talent, especially if it's going to be in a role that has any, amount of hiring involved in it. Like, we need to know that they're capable of finding and identifying and developing talent. So really, this is a chance for you to get face-to-face with someone, figure out as best as possible if they have the skill set, but also if they're a good fit and a good match for your culture. And that's why the in-person, we feel, is so important at Permanent Equity. That's why going out for a meal is really important. It just provides this unexpected setting where anything can happen, right? And it's not so rigid. It's not so structured. I have a really funny story that I can tell, and feel free to cut if you are like, actually, that wasn't funny. That sucked.
Well, we will be, Johnny, ready to judge.
You guys can be the judge of this.
Funny.
Let's do it.
So this was probably a couple years ago. I'm in New York. Me and Emily and Brent are there. Brent was doing his own cool guy stuff.
Yeah, as he does.
Emily and I were meeting up with someone from the Orbit for drinks.
What's the Orbit?
The Orbit is our talent network. So I was connected to Peter through the Orbit. And so while I was there, I was meeting several different people, but it happened to be that we were meeting Peter for drinks. Although the bartender did not know what a Shirley Temple was. Troubling. And since I don't drink, It's really my go-to. So we had drinks. Emily had a meeting she had to get off to. So Peter and I were walking to dinner. And in New York, 20, 25 blocks is close. For me, I'm a Midwestern gal. I'm used to just walking to my car and going places, right?
You used an umbrella to walk 20 feet from
I needed an umbrella to get out here to the recording studio. So, Peter's like, oh yeah, the place we're going for dinner is really close. I was wearing what would now be considered inappropriate foot attire for this. And we're in Midtown Manhattan. We had not even gone a block when I completely tripped and fell flat on my face. Not just flat on my face. I skinned my knee. I skinned my toes. I was bleeding down my shin.
Oh, that's so good.
I was also wearing a dress that may or may not have just come completely up. What happened? There was a young group of young youths walking towards us. I mean, they were just laughing at me. And so this is a funny story just to say the situation, I feel like what I got to learn about Peter in this just random situation was really genuine and really unscripted, obviously unscripted, but he was very kind, very gracious, helped me up, was concerned about me, totally pulled an audible and was like, hey, let's just go over here and get a slice of pizza. Obviously I'm bleeding down my leg. We didn't even go to the restaurant that he had reservations for us at. So it just really made that experience, it was very endearing. I realized a lot about what Peter was like as a human in that unscripted sort of opportunity.
Did we hire Peter?
No, to be fair, this was not a job interview. I was not interviewing. I was just meeting with Peter. But
got it.
Yeah. So he's like still one of my favorite people. I send him a permanent equity Christmas gift every year.
Which is why every job interview now you stage a fall where you cut your knee and have a little oopsies.
Yeah, that's right. And
then you look up at him like, how are you reacting?
Are you embarrassed for me? Like, what's going on? I don't get embarrassed. It's a weird part of my personality.
Okay.
I don't get embarrassed by things. So I wasn't embarrassed so much as I was like just annoyed I had worn those shoes, in pain because my knee was bleeding, annoyed we weren't going to be able to go to the restaurant, but I wasn't embarrassed per se.
It's the last time you wear your Crocs to New York. That's what I'm telling you.
Hey man, you can dress a Croc up, you can dress a Croc down. They are so versatile.
That's good.
This was just talking about the value of being in person with people, right? And having a part of your interview process that is not just you sitting down in a room one-on-one with them.
You want to create these opportunities for serendipity, reaction, maybe manufacture a little scandal.
I'm talking about how do they react? How do they interact with the server at the restaurant? How do they interact with, do they hold a door? And I'm not looking for like a Texas gentleman or anything, but I'm just saying like you're just able to observe their interactions with more people.
Right.
And that's helpful. All right. So we're going to number 7. This is the reference checks. So I think in a lot of small businesses, people probably skip this or are inclined to skip it because it's like, oh, we've already spent time with this person. We feel really good about them. Their resume is good. Their background's good. Let's just hire them. We're busy. We got to move on with stuff. But I would encourage people not to skip the background checks. And a couple things that can help you get better at doing reference checks is ask the candidate to connect you to 2 of their previous supervisors. So you want to talk to past supervisors. And if the candidate connects you, you're going to have a lot better chance of getting connected with those people. So candidate connects you via email or however they choose to do that. And then when you actually get on the phone with these people, let them know that it's entirely confidential and have some questions prepared and don't be afraid to dig in a little bit. But it's worth spending 30 minutes, an hour to do those background
reference checks.
Right. This is, you can do a criminal background check as well, but so don't skip the reference check. It's an important part.
Can you give me a couple questions that you would ask to mine maybe some of the negative aspects? Would you do that? My assumption would be you have an opportunity to find out maybe some of the downsides of this person in these calls.
Right. So one thing is, would you hire this person back? They obviously aren't with your company anymore. Would you hire them back? Or if the person that you're speaking with is at a new company themselves, you might ask them like, would you hire so-and-so to work for you in your current company? And so just getting a sense of that, you could ask them, some people like to ask like on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this person? And if they rate them anything lower than like an 8, that's kind of a red flag. It's just like, okay, maybe you give them, 7 or an 8. Well, why not a 10? Why not a 9? And kind of dig into that. Like what kept you from giving them those last 1 or 2 points? And there's usually something behind that. Yeah. Yeah. So really that is all the steps, 7 steps in the hiring playbook. The only other thing I will say, and this is not really part of a step, but it's something that you really need to think about it. And it's your firing process. All I'm going to say about that is though, sometimes we feel so committed to someone because we've spent all this time and they've gone through our process and we really feel, like we vetted them and we don't want to be wrong. Yep. Right. Like I think more than anything, we're committed to thinking that we were right, that we got it right. But allow yourself to recognize that maybe you could have gotten it wrong. And if that becomes a factor, if that comes into play, you need to be okay with firing someone, with letting someone go, and don't drag it out. You know, like once you've realized, like own it. I made a mistake in this process and we need to be okay letting someone go and try again.
I think that's a good 8th bonus tip.
Yeah, bonus tip.
Okay, so I think we're ready to see Johnny now. We're nearing the end here, but what are you going to be listening for? What's the point of this exercise? Walk me through it.
So this is kind of just an example of a couple questions that I typically use during my screening interview.
Okay, so this is that first interview that's 30 to 60 minutes.
Yep, that's right.
And you are going to move him through depending on how this goes.
Exactly. And the root of what I'm trying to get at is do I think Johnny's a good fit for the role we're hiring?
Right.
Like, that's the question we're answering here.
Yep. Do we have a fictitious role we're hiring for right now in this case study?
I think this is a fictitious interview for the role Johnny currently has.
Well, Johnny, what is their current role? Tell us about the job that you're applying for.
Sure. It's the Director of Portfolio Operations.
Okay.
So I work with our operations team to support, show some love to all of our portfolio companies. So that could mean plugging in on a particular project. It could be a short-term staff augmentation. It could be kind of providing an outside strategic perspective to help answer a question, solve a problem. Yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell.
You want to take it away from here, Kelie?
Yeah. All right. So we've set the tone. We've already done kind of our initial vetting conversations. We're moving forward to the question.
Right.
So, Johnny, our goal with every role that we hire is we're really trying to just get the right person in the right seat. That's really important to us. So one of the things we think about is this idea of identifying your superpower. We think of superpower as being the intersection of what you really enjoy doing, what you're good at doing, and then also, what a business needs to be successful. So if you kind of think about the intersection of those three things as being your superpower, what would you say is yours?
Well, I think I would say that I'm adaptable. So I've done a variety of things, both professionally and personally. And I think that some things that come naturally to me have helped me adapt to new situations. And then I think I've developed some of those muscles over time. And I kind of see it as this combination of processing new information and just figuring out a way to get things done. So I might give you two quick examples, one personal, one professional, of how I think I've been adaptive in my life. So the first, for a personal story, the very first home that I ever purchased was this old 1915 brick 2-story flat roofed house in St. Louis. And on day one of home ownership, my roofer was peeling back the layers of the rubber matting that made up the roof. And he pulls that up and he tells me that the woodwork underneath is charred black. So he told my other subcontractors working inside the house to get out because he was afraid the whole thing might collapse.
Was it from a fire?
Yeah, so apparently there was a fire at some point, and it was not discovered in my inspection. So day one of home ownership, I'm told that my house might collapse. If it doesn't, it's at least going to be expensive to fix.
Lovely.
So not the news anyone wants, but what did I do? Well, I trusted the professional, and then I asked him what I could do to support him. What resources did he need? What information? How could I help him? And then I had to work with my other subcontractors to rearrange their schedules and try to keep the project roughly on schedule as best as we could. And then for a professional example, I was previously in management consulting, and I would just point to that as adapting based on the kind of job that it is. So with that, you have to change engagements or projects every few weeks or every few months. You could be in a completely different industry, different company, solving completely different kinds of problems. And you're solving really difficult problems. So you're forced to adapt, you're forced to learn, you're forced to jump in really quickly. That's one of the things that I'm drawn to in this role, working with different portfolio companies, solving different problems. I see that I'm going to have to be adaptable. And I think that's one of maybe my superpower.
So a lot of people are scared of change, or I think we could interject adapting. A lot of people would shy away from that. How do you think that you figured out that you were good at being adaptable, and not only good at it, but you actually liked doing it?
Well, I might go back to a personal story from when I was a kid. My sister had an accident and she was burned, and I was like 8 or 9 years old probably. And of course, my mom was upset. My sister was crying, trip to the emergency room, all this. And, a day or two later, I remember my mom telling me that she couldn't believe how incredibly calm I was throughout that entire process. And so I think that disposition of being able to just deal with some crazy circumstances kind of leads naturally to being able to adapt as well. So that's my final answer. And if you don't like it, I will adapt and give you another.
So next question for you, Johnny. I'd love to hear about a time that you hit a roadblock professionally or faced a challenge that you just didn't know how to solve. Maybe it was outside of your wheelhouse, outside of your skill set. You'd never tackled that problem before. What was the problem? What steps did you take to solve it? What was the result?
Sure. So I was the lead supply officer on a Navy ship in the Middle East. And one day we found out that we were without a very critical, highly specialized material that was only stored 2 places in the world.
Uranium.
Not that.
Atomic bombs?
No, not that either.
He can't tell us, David, or,
I'm not here. Sorry, I'm not in the interview.
I will be a little intentionally vague with some of the details, but it was stored the west coast of the U.S. and then another place in the Middle East. And so we needed this today, and we didn't have it that day. So basically, it was my job to figure out how we could get it there and get it there as quickly as possible. And so given the immediacy of the issue, well, let me say, I guess the question I didn't know, I didn't know before that where it was stored. I didn't know how we were going to move it. I didn't know what I had to do to move it. I didn't know who was going to be in charge of making decisions on any of this. All I knew is that I had to do it and get the job done. And so given the immediacy of the issue, once I found out that it was stored in 2 places, I set both of them in motion towards me because I didn't know which one was going to be fastest. And then I quickly pivoted to talking to everyone who I thought could be a resource. So I went with rank and I talked to admirals. I called friends who I thought might be able to help me out, owed me a favor or anything like that, just to put all my cards on the table, leverage, pull every tool out of my tool belt, whatever analogy you want to use. And then within a few hours, I found out that shipping material from the West Coast was actually going to be my fastest option. That gave me the most control and visibility. And so that's the one that we kept moving, and we put all our focus on that one so we could pause the other one as well. And then as this material's flying across the globe to the Middle East, triple checking every single step to get it from the airport out to our ship, floating in the middle of the water, making sure that every step along the way, we removed every barrier so we could get it as quickly as possible. And that's what happened. I kind of treated it as I might if I were moving a living organ, to give it the utmost care just because of the critical nature of it. And so as a result, we got it as quickly as possible. And I think some of the skills necessary here of just figuring things out on the fly kind of tie into this role where there's not always going to be a playbook, kind of have to figure some things out. And once again, it goes back to kind of working under some pressure as well, which I think I do well.
So what did you guys learn? What did you implement into your system so that maybe you wouldn't face this same problem again?
Yeah, I think that's one of the key takeaways is we actually established another supply reserve of it at another place in the Middle East that was more easily accessible to our ship. And so that if we had a similar incident in the future, we could get it much more easily.
Excellent.
How'd the interview go for you, Kelie?
I think I'd hire him.
You'd move him through. Why would you move him through?
I really like what Johnny does with his answers in terms of being specific about things. So that's one of the things that drives me crazy as an interviewer. And it's a real kind of pitfall that I think people fall into is they try to be really vague or broad about things. And I don't know if it's because they're thinking I don't want to get in the weeds, about this specific thing, XYZ. But what I really want to see is I want to see detail around this was the problem and these were the steps. And a lot of times, you can dig in further, just by asking, and then what happened? And then what happened? And it lets the person know no, I really am interested in the details. So you did this thing and then what happened, And the other thing that I'm listening for, so in the question I asked Johnny about the roadblocks and the problem and how did you solve it, for our context, we're hiring for small businesses. So I'm listening to hear how resourceful he is kind of independently, right? So he got on the phone, he called people, he leveraged his resources, he put things in motion. So one, I want to hear what you did in the process, right? But I also want to understand how resourceful you are, because in a small business setting, you're not going to have necessarily an IT department, So if I'm asking someone and they're telling me about a problem that they solved and they said, well, first of all, I filed a help ticket with the IT department. And then I asked my supervisor, this XYZ, that's not showing me a level of sort of independent resourcefulness that we need within a small business. So we're looking for kind of 4 key skills here at Permanent Equity to be successful, we think, and a good match with our culture that's adaptable, humble, curious, and kind. It's culturally what I think will be successful in our portfolio companies.
So we've gone 1 through 8, and we're going to recap this in writing. One of the great things about working with Sarah, who you mentioned before, whenever we do these audio podcasts, these conversations, we convert it into a written form. So it's not just a transcript. It's some sort of slightly punchier, more actionable written takeaway. So you'll be able to read all of what Kelly's talked about at permanentequity.com, and you can also listen to the audio while you're reading it.
Yeah, so 1 through 8, and 8 was a soft 8.
Yeah.
But 1 through 8. So
1 through 7B.
Number 1, it starts with a good JD. Understand the job description. Number 2, a resume screening process that is both automated and efficient. Number 3, you've got your screening interview. 4 would be your competency interview. 5 is that deliverable component or potentially a personality assessment. 6 are in-person, in-depth interview that includes a off-site component, potentially the Bud's barbecue test.
The old trip and scrape your knee.
That's right. 7 is the reference checks. Don't forget them. And then our soft 8 was just be willing to accept that you can be wrong and be quick to fire if that's the case.
How do you feel equipped, Johnny? You can start your hiring process at your company now?
No, I mean, I heard those, but now I need the details. I think I missed 1 through 5. Would you mind going through those?
This podcast is made available solely for educational purposes, and the information presented here does not constitute investment, legal, tax, or other professional advice, and should not be construed as an offering of advisory services or as a solicitation to buy, an offer to sell, or a recommendation of any securities or other financial instruments. The thoughts and opinions expressed by or through this podcast are those of the individual guests and speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of Permanent Equity. The discussion on this podcast of any entity, product, or service does not imply an endorsement thereof, and the guests of this podcast may have a financial interest, whether through investment or otherwise, in any one or more of such entities, products, or services. This podcast is presented by Permanent Equity and may not be copied, reproduced, republished, or posted in any form without its express written consent.